Savan had always moved through the world with a quiet, steady presence, the kind that made people pause without knowing why. He wasn't a prophet, not in any formal sense, and he rejected every title that tried to cling to him. But those who spent even a single evening near him felt an unmistakable shift, like the air itself softened, like some hidden thread inside them loosened and breathed for the first time. That evening, 3 nights before his trial, the small circle of students gathered with him behind the sandstone ruins just outside the city. The moonlight spilled in through broken arches, catching on drifting dust and turning it silver. The old temple had long collapsed into sacred rubble, but its silence made it the only place where Savan felt the world's invisible watchers hesitate. He looked at each of them, Nira with her anxious hands, Jalen trying to appear braver than he felt, and Oren who never spoke unless absolutely necessary. They were frightened, though they tried to hide it. Rumors had swept the city like wildfire. The council had decided Savan's teachings were too destabilizing, too disruptive, too liberating to be tolerated. They believed he was dismantling their influence, one awakening soul at a time. And they were right. The council, of course, wasn't the true enemy. They were just puppets pulled along by forces they couldn't see or understand, the same forces Savan had spent years exposing, the silent feeders that drifted through human emotion like fishermen trawling a sea. The students waited, huddled close as if the shadows themselves were listening. "You've noticed," Savan began softly, "how your fear has been sharper these past days. How your anger flares faster. How hopelessness tries to settle behind your ribs." Nira nodded first, then the others followed. "That isn't you," he said, brushing dust from a broken stone tablet. "It's them." No one asked who "them" referred to. They had all felt the presence, those invisible parasites older than any kingdom, older than the earth's own stories. They called them the harvesters. Entities that fed not on flesh, nor on thoughts, but on the emotional storms that mortals were pushed into daily. They fed particularly well when fear coiled tight in the chest or anger burned hot enough to blur reason. Savan had spent years showing his students how the harvesters influenced breath, nudging it into the frantic rhythms that made the emotional energy easier to siphon. And despite everything they had learned, all 3 of them still struggled to remain steady when fear struck. "Tonight," Savan said, "I teach you what I withheld until now." A cold wind drifted through the ruined hall as if stirred by those unseen listeners. Savan ignored it. His voice grew even calmer, almost tender. "They cannot harm you," he said. "They can only feed on what you produce unconsciously. Your fear. Your sorrow. Your anger, so long as you breathe the way they've trained humans to breathe." He stepped closer, his cloak stirring faintly with the wind. "But if you interrupt that cycle, even once, you become unreachable. They lose your scent entirely." Jalen swallowed. "You're saying we can stop them? Fully stop them?" "Yes," Savan replied. "Completely. The technique is simple, but the shift it creates is profound. It makes you invisible to their entire harvesting grid." The students leaned in. "3 breaths," Savan said. "That is all." He lifted a hand and placed it over his heart, grounding himself as if to demonstrate something beyond words. "The first breath is awareness," he explained. "When emotion rises, fear, panic, anger, pause and watch your breath. Don't change it. Just watch. The moment you observe it, you interrupt the harvester's first mechanism. They rely on your breath reacting automatically to emotion. The moment you become conscious, you reclaim control." Nira closed her eyes to try, but Savan gently touched her shoulder. "Not yet. Listen first. He inhaled slowly, the breath deep but unforced, then exhaled with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime watching the inner world shift. The second breath, he continued, is the breath that cuts the cord. You breathe in and silently remind yourself, I am not this emotion. You breathe out and release it, not by pushing it away but by letting it be merely energy passing through. When you no longer identify with the feeling, the harvesters lose their grip. Oren opened his eyes. And the third? Sevan nodded, a faint smile softening his features. The third is the breath that removes you from their world entirely. You breathe in and remember your true nature, consciousness experiencing a temporary form. Hold that recognition, even for a heartbeat. Then breathe out with the knowing that no parasite, no astral predator, no unseen entity can perceive what you truly are. Something shifted in the air then, a thinning, a subtle quiet. The students felt it. That, Sevan said gently, is your doorway out of their reach. Jalen stared at him, equal parts awed and frightened. But if this is real, why teach it now? Why wait until you're about to be taken? Sevan looked past them toward the open sky, where faint lights flickered in the far distance, drifting like shadows pretending to be stars. Because the trial doesn't matter, he said. Whether they punish me or praise me, it's the same to them. What matters is what happens next, what happens to you. When they try to use my fear to feed their masters, they will fail. And that failure will ripple. It will show them that the system can be broken. Nira's voice quivered. But if they can't feed on you, won't they try to destroy you? Sevan turned back to her, his expression softening further. They cannot destroy what they cannot perceive. The ruins fell into a deeper silence. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. You're going to watch them try, Sevan said, and you're going to remember what you saw. And then, when the world shakes around you, you'll use the 3 breaths. You'll slip out of their reach. And one day, you'll teach others the same. A tremor of understanding ran through the students. Fear remained, but it no longer owned their breathing. Not fully. Not tonight. Sevan motioned for them to sit. Now, he said, lowering himself onto the cracked stone floor, we practice until your bodies remember what your minds are learning. The harvesters have shaped human breath for millennia. But breath is yours. It always was. One by one, under the pale moonlight, they mirrored his movements. And as Sevan guided their inhales and exhales, something in the ruins shifted, like an ancient shadow retreating from a flame it couldn't extinguish. The city square felt heavier than usual that morning, as if the air itself resisted movement. Dawn had barely broken, yet people flooded in from every direction, drawn by the promise of spectacle. Sevan's trial was not truly a trial, everyone knew that. It was a performance the council needed to maintain the illusion of control, a ritual of dominance meant to reassure the fearful and distract the restless. But beneath the surface of that gathering crowd, the real audience was not human at all. Unseen shapes drifted above and between the people like storm clouds made of shadow and hunger. The harvesters had been waiting for this moment with an almost rabid anticipation. To them, Sevan's condemnation meant one thing, an emotional feast. Fear from the spectators, rage from the council, humiliation from Sevan, this cocktail of human intensity was their favorite delicacy. And today, they expected a banquet. Sevan knew the truth of it the moment he stepped into the square, escorted by 2 guards who understood neither their role nor the forces manipulating them. The crowd murmured, their emotions swirling in waves so thick he could almost taste them. But beneath it all, he felt an eerie stillness within himself, a calm that wasn't numbness but clarity. The 3 breaths he had practiced for years lived inside him now like a steady flame no wind could reach. He lifted his gaze and saw them, the harvesters. They hovered above the council's platform, their forms flickering like smoke barely able to hold shape. They were eager, pulsing with anticipation. They wanted him terrified. They wanted him desperate. They wanted his suffering to crack open like a ripe fruit. But Savan inhaled, not deeply, not dramatically, simply with quiet awareness. The first breath. He noticed the tightness in his ribs from being bound. He noticed the tension in his jaw, the prickle of fear attempting to rise up like a tide. He observed it all without interfering. In that moment of observation, he felt the first mechanism of the parasites falter. Their siphoning patterns, usually subtle and nearly automatic, wavered. The closest harvester recoiled slightly, as if confused. The council elder stepped forward, raising his hand for silence. His voice carried sharply across the square. Savan, son of no house, teacher of forbidden doctrine. You stand accused of corrupting minds, of undermining the sacred order, of spreading delusions that tear at the foundation of our society. How do you answer these charges? Savan said nothing. His silence wasn't defiance, it was simply clarity. Words were no longer necessary. The crowd rustled with tension. Some glared with anger, others with sympathy, some with hidden hope. Human emotion swelled, thick and electric. The harvesters surged forward to drink from it. But not from him. Savan drew his second breath. As he inhaled, he recognized, I am not this emotion. Not the fear, not the dread, not the anger rising in the crowd. He felt them moving through him like wine through reeds, but none of it belonged to him. As he exhaled, he let the sensations flow without holding them. Something snapped, in the invisible realm rather than the physical. The cord between emotion and harvest broke. The parasites, expecting a surge of delicious energy, found only a hollow silence. They clustered closer, frantic. The elder raised his arm again, signaling for the trial to continue. His voice was steady but something in his aura shook. You deny nothing. Then your fate is sealed. The guards pushed Savan to his knees. A hush fell over the entire square. Even the wind seemed to stop. The harvesters hovered inches above him now, trembling with greed. Fear should have risen in him like a tidal wave. But instead, stillness. He inhaled his third breath. This one was deeper, not forced but expansive, as if his lungs opened into something vast. I am consciousness experiencing form, he remembered. The truth was simple. The truth was complete. He was not a man being tried. He was the awareness observing a body kneeling in a city square. He was not prey. He was not energy to be consumed. He was not visible to beings who fed only on the illusions of separation and vulnerability. He held the breath for 4 counts. And in that suspended moment, something extraordinary happened. Every harvester froze. Their writhing forms flickered violently, not with hunger but confusion, then panic. They lunged at him, trying desperately to lock onto his emotional field, but there was nothing to grasp. Their tendrils slipped through him like smoke through stone. He was broadcasting a frequency they couldn't process. Savan exhaled slowly, and with that breath, he vanished to them. Not physically. Not to human eyes. But to the harvesters, he disappeared completely, like a candle snuffed out in a room they depended on for light. The elder, unaware of the invisible frenzy above, lifted his staff to deliver the formal verdict. The crowd gasped, some with horror, others with morbid fascination. Yet Savan felt none of it as personal. The world around him continued, but he was no longer entangled in its emotional web. A harvester shrieked, a sound the crowd couldn't hear, frustrated, starving, bewildered. Another slammed into the space above Savan as if trying to detect the energetic imprint he no longer emitted. All of them swarmed in a vortex of confusion and rage. But Savan remained unreachable. His students, standing at the edge of the square disguised among the onlookers, watched with a mixture of terror and transcendence. They saw the tension in Savan's shoulders fade. They saw something luminous settle around him like a second skin. They saw the impossible, the invisible predators recoiling from him in defeat. In that moment, they understood. The technique wasn't symbolic. It wasn't metaphorical. It worked. The council's sentence echoed distantly, irrelevant in the face of what had just unfolded. Savan bowed his head, not in submission, but in compassion for a world that still didn't know its own power. The harvesters retreated in a frenzy of agitation, realizing the feast they had prepared for was gone. Savan had become untouchable, unharvestable, invisible. When the dust settled after the trial, the city slowly returned to its rhythms, unaware that something monumental had shifted in the unseen layers of existence. The council believed they had neutralized a troublemaker. The crowds believed they had witnessed justice, or, depending on who was asked, a tragedy. But Savan's students knew the truth. They had watched the harvesters, creatures who had fed on humanity for countless generations, fail for the first time. And that failure had rewritten something deep inside them. They gathered again in the quiet refuge of the fallen temple ruins. The same crumbling pillars, the same moonlit stillness, but everything felt different now. The space itself seemed to expand around them, as though relieved. Nira arrived first. Her face was pale, her hands trembling even as she tried to hide it. She wasn't frightened of Savan's fate, she was overwhelmed by what she had seen. It wasn't that they couldn't reach him, she whispered to herself, replaying the moment. It was like he wasn't even made of the same substance anymore. Oren stepped into the hall not long after, silent as always, but his eyes carried a question he didn't know how to ask. Jalen came last, pacing in restless circles before he even reached the center. None of them spoke until Savan emerged from the shadows of the inner chamber. He was unbound now, his cloak hanging loosely from his shoulders, dust collecting along the hem. He hadn't fled the city, though he easily could have. He had simply stepped aside, outside the range of the forces that once targeted him. And no one, not the guards, not the council, not even the harvesters, could track him through that shift. You saw, Savan said softly as he approached them. You saw what they cannot touch. Jalen exhaled shakily. It shouldn't be possible. How did they lose you like that? How did they not sense anything? Because I stopped generating what they feed on, Savan answered. Once I withdrew identification from the emotions, there was nothing for them to harvest. When I recognized my true nature, there was nothing for them to perceive. Nira sank to her knees. But what about us? What happens when we're afraid? When panic hits before we can think? We can't vanish like you. Not yet. Savan crouched beside her, his voice warm and steady. That is why we practice. Not to be perfect, but to be aware. He motioned for them to sit. They formed a circle in the dust, the moonlight catching their silhouettes. You think the technique is a shield, Sevan said. But it's not. It's recognition. The shield forms naturally when you remember what you actually are. Oren finally spoke, 2 quiet words, teach us. Sevan nodded. Close your eyes, he murmured. They obeyed. The temple breathed with them. When emotion rises, Sevan said slowly, your instinct is to drown in it. That instinct is the harvester's design, not your own wisdom. Your body reacts automatically, chest tightening, breath shortening, panic knotting behind your ribs. And the parasites ride those reactions like currents. He let the silence stretch before continuing. But you are not required to drown. You never were. Nira inhaled unevenly. But it feels automatic. It does, Sevan agreed. Until awareness comes. He guided them through the first breath, the awareness breath. They felt their bodies tightening with old tension, the echoes of fears they had carried their whole lives. But this time, instead of letting those fears dictate their breath, they watched the breath itself. And in watching, something softened. Then came the second breath, the breath of disidentification. They breathed in with the recognition, I am not this emotion. And they breathed out with the understanding, this is simply energy passing through. Jalen's shoulders eased. Oren's jaw unclenched. Nira felt a warmth spread across her chest. Finally, the third breath, the breath that shifts the entire field of perception. They inhaled with the knowing, I am consciousness experiencing form. They held it. Then exhaled with the truth, what I am cannot be harvested. A stillness bloomed through the ruined temple like the opening of a hidden flower. Sevan opened his eyes. There, he said. You felt it. Jalen blinked, dazed. It feels like I stepped out of something. You did, Sevan said gently. You stepped out of the grid they built. The net only works on those who believe they are small. Nira let out a long exhale. Sevan, is this what you meant? That we would use the technique in our darkest moments? Yes. His voice was soft but firm. The world will try to shake you. Fear will rise. Anger will flare. The harvesters will circle. But breath is your anchor. Recognition is your escape. And each time you practice, you become harder for them to perceive. Oren lifted his gaze. Will they come for us? Sevan shook his head. They cannot come for what they cannot sense. He rose, stepping toward the broken archway. The night sky was vast and deep, each star a spark of possible consciousness. His students joined him, standing beneath that cosmic tapestry. You will teach others, Sevan said. Not with sermons. Not with fear. But with your presence. When people see you remain calm where they collapse, steady where they spiral, aware where they drown, they will ask. And we tell them? Jalen whispered. You show them, Sevan corrected. One breath at a time. A faint rumbling echoed through the sky, an astral shifting, not physical thunder. The harvesters sensed what had happened, sensed the subtle rebellion blooming in this ruined temple. But they could not find its source. The students felt the tremor, but it no longer pierced them. Sevan exhaled with quiet peace. This is how the system ends, he said. Not with war. With awareness. And beneath the moonlit ruins, 3 new beings stepped into sovereignty, not warriors, not prophets, but consciousness awakening to itself. The harvesters had lost their hold. And for the first time in countless ages, humanity had taken a step out of the dark. What Savan shared with his students was never meant to become doctrine, nor another story passed around campfires, nor a legend embellished by generations. It was meant to be lived. The 3 breaths he revealed were not a technique reserved for mystics or ascetics, but a reminder of a truth so simple that most people overlook it their entire lives. You are not the emotion you feel, and you are not the fragile form emotions try to convince you to be. The harvesters, those unseen siphons that drift through the currents of human turmoil, depend entirely on your forgetting that. Awareness breaks the spell. Recognition dissolves the trap. Remembering your true nature removes you from reach. Every moment of fear, every spike of anger, every wave of despair is an invitation to step back into yourself. Not to fight, not to resist, but to watch. To breathe. And in that breath, you rediscover the freedom that has always been yours. Savan showed his students what becomes possible when a single person chooses not to feed the system that feeds on them. And through them, that choice spreads quietly, one calm moment in a world of noise, one clear breath in a storm. If Savan's story speaks to you, it's because some part of you already knows this truth. Some part of you remembers the stillness he demonstrated. Some part of you is ready to practice it, to live it, to share it, not through preaching, but through presence. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to support what we're doing here. Subscribe to stay connected to teachings that uplift rather than drain. Like this video so more people can find their way back to themselves. And share it with someone who might need this reminder today. Your breath is your doorway. Step through it.